the idea was developed that the film should not be in the camera, should not be in a roll form, but should be in a disc. And there are several advantages to that. It wouldn't curl. You could advance it easily in a camera, and that you could have a nice, neat, small camera. And so work started on a disc camera. Now, I spent my last 4 or 5 years at Kodak sort of resisting that program, or at least saying how tough it was going to be to get a good enough picture in the very small film that you're going to have in that disc. So as I say, I spent my last few years sort of resisting that program. Yeah. Well, in 1982, the disc camera came on the market, and it was a big hit. Now, I was almost right on the quality not being quite good enough, but it was good enough, just good enough, and by now it's better, so that they made it. So now everybody has a disc camera and takes simple pictures, pictures with no problem, automatic advance, fixed focus. You don't have to focus, and it's quite a system.
Yes, that's so convenient. You put it in your pocket.
Put it in your pocket. It's there all the time. It's there all the
Put it in
time.
their purses.
Yes.
And, when they think about it, and it works out fine.
So, so that just about brings us up to date on the cameras and the film and where we are today. I mean, there are millions of pictures that are made. I used to go around lecturing about the science and the developments in photography, and back in the 1960s, I remember a statement that I used to make, which I think I'm going to quote right here because I enjoyed it so much. I have to read this. In 1930, an editorial in the Penrose Annual said, and I quote, "To imagine that dividends can be paid to shareholders in a process that seeks to supply the public with snapshots or portraits in color is extreme foolishness." Now, in 1966, the Eastman Kodak Annual Report says, according to recent trade estimates, more than 3 billion pictures were made during 1966 by amateur photographers in this country, and 6 of every 10 were shot on color film. April the 67th issue of Photographic Journal, Dr. Lloyd Varden states, there are thought to be about 1,350 color finishes of amateur films and prints for the general public. About 900 in-plant color laboratories operate for their own needs, including industrial firms, school photographers, and so forth. In addition, there are 690 known custom color laboratories.
Amazing
so
development.
After 1930, a lot happened.
That's right. That's an amazing.
Let's cut it. The film and its development, but and the camera some too. But the camera is an important part of taking a picture, and an awful lot has happened to cameras in that 30 or 40 years. Back in 1938, the photoelectric exposure control was put on the camera by Kodak. That was not successful. Interesting, it was before its time, and it disappeared for a while, but it came back. And exposure control, automatic exposure control, is a very important part of cameras these days. Rare earth glass was developed in 1941, and that gave different ratio of index of refraction to dispersion, and it made it possible to design better lenses. Luminized lenses came along in 1946 that cut out the lens glare, and that was an important contribution. Then computer design of lenses made it possible to make a very complicated lens in 4 elements that used to take 9 elements. So just plain the use of the computer made an awful lot of difference in lenses. Aspheric lenses, a lens instead of being spherical ground, if it could be molded in an aspheric shape, again, that makes it possible to make a simpler lens that's corrected for astigmatism and achromatic problems and so forth. So a great deal has happened in the lens design area. Autofocus mechanisms have come along, and that makes a tremendous difference in the simplicity in the use of the camera. One type of autofocus is sending out a radar signal. When it bounces back, you've got a focus, but you can't take a picture through a glass window with that, for example.
Yeah.
But another kind is maximizing the signal. I mean, when a picture is in focus, the blacks and the whites are sharply defined, and reading the brightness across an image gives you spikes of intensity, and maximizing that is a method of telling when you're in focus. So that maximizing that measurement is the way that autofocus is done now. But autofocus camera, you don't have to focus, it just is there, is fine. Shutters have been improved, so you can get 1,000th of a second or a second very accurately, and that is absolutely necessary too. Reflex lenses, so that you can look in it and see what you're photographing and not get the wrong picture. Automatic advance of the film, like this disc camera. The film advances automatically. You press the button and you're ready for the next picture. Of course, that's good for the company too, and people take a lot more pictures when that happens.
Right.
But all of those developments in mechanics and in optics have played a very important role. I've mentioned the coating techniques in coating the film. I mean, tremendous amount of progress has been made in the coating techniques that make it possible to make the films today. So all of those advances simplify our taking pictures. Well, I think that just about brings us up to where we are and where photography is these days.
Well, it's been a wonderful exposition of the history of photography, and so that I think we have a very, very complete record there. And perhaps just to round out this whole picture, there was one point there in your presentation where you mentioned the diversion with regard to the defense work during World War II, and of course, everyone in the nation was mobilized, including Kodak, to assist that. And I was wondering if you, in order to round this whole picture out, if you could describe your participation in that to just round out the whole picture here.
Oh yeah, I'd be very happy to talk about my involvement in the Manhattan Project in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. As I said along the way there, in 1943, I joined the Manhattan Project. I had seen people from the research laboratory disappearing, and people went off onto a project, and when nobody was told where they were going, and I sort of offered my services to Dr. Mees. I said, I see a lot of people going out onto a war effort of some sort. I'd be happy to do that. And he said, gee, I hadn't thought about you going. He said, okay, sure. So I was sent to Berkeley, California, to the radiation laboratory to learn the beginnings of the electromagnetic separation of uranium. I had gotten my degree there. I had known Ernest Lawrence. In fact, he had been on my examining committee for my PhD.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, so I knew him. Yeah. I had met Oppenheimer out there at Berkeley in college. Pauling, I guess he wasn't involved then, but I had met him then. But anyway, I went back out to the radiation laboratory to sort of get a basic knowledge as to what was going on, and then went back to Rochester and became involved in some of the chemical operations that were being developed there in the Rochester Research Laboratory.
Oh, yeah.
And then very shortly went down to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where I was to become the head of the chemistry division of the Tennessee Eastman operation. Tennessee Eastman was operating a plant, the electromagnetic separation of uranium, and it was all a physics operation. There was an awful lot of chemistry involved, but in the preparation of the whole project, I think the chemistry had not quite been developed as much as the physics had, because it was a physics operation, and we had problems.
And of course, at that time, the physicists believed the only problems were physics.
Yes.
The others were incidental.
Yes. Well, we had problems that we had to solve as we went along, and we did. We had a wonderful crew of people there, like Clarence Larson, and we solved problems that were coming up every day, and we made the thing work. And I don't think I need to go into the details of that, but we made the thing work, and you know the story of that. Life in Oak Ridge was sort of pleasant, but it was very strenuous. My wife loved it, and I loved it, and we were the early ones to leave. Unfortunately, at the end of the war, Dr. Mies had come down to Oak Ridge and asked me to come back to Rochester. They were making some changes in the color photography work, and who wanted me to come back to Rochester. So I went back to Rochester in May of 1945. That was before the final development, before anybody knew whether or not we had been successful. And then I didn't know any more from then on for a while.
But of course, at that particular time, the die was cast. The material had been produced.
The material had been produced and delivered. Yes.
So that the job was essentially done for that particular section.
I could remember there were two sections to the plant: the alpha that would enrich the uranium up to 7 or 8, but 7, 12, finally 10 to 12, and then the beta, which would take it all up higher. And at first, the output of the alpha plant, they wanted us to send out to Los Alamos, and we kept all we could make. We'd send out there till finally they said, "Okay, don't send anymore." So we knew that amount meant something. You know, we could sort of guess that amount had a meaning to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that amount that was delivered gave them the numbers that were needed for the final design.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that must have been a very interesting part of your career.
It was a very interesting, and certainly so much experience. I mean, all of us, so many of us had so much more responsibility for people's behavior and for chemistry and for a lot of things that we never would have had under any other circumstance. And so people grew up pretty fast at Oak Ridge. And it was a wonderful experience.
Yes, and of course you had many of your colleagues then, of course, who had come from Rochester and from Tennessee Eastman returned, of course, including, I believe, subsequently, didn't the president or chairman of Eastman Kodak spend some time in Oak Ridge?
Yes, he came down. He visited. He visited on occasion. Yes, he did. Mm-hmm. Yes. One thing that sort of amused me, I found afterwards, was that my name could not be in the newspapers or in any publicity because my PhD at Berkeley in 1934 had been with G.N. Lewis on heavy hydrogen. Now, there was no connection between that and what I was doing, but I mean, the powers that be had looked up all that sort of stuff, and the fact that I had been involved in heavy hydrogen back there meant that my name could not be in any publicity or in the newspaper, which I did not know at the time.
But of course, heavy hydrogen played a role.
It played a role in other aspects of it. Yes, it did. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well,
now, the Tennessee Eastman operated this plant, the Y12 plant at Oak Ridge, and there were 200 or 300 people from the Eastman Kodak Company that came down that were in management positions. Now, this is a story that I'm about to tell that intrigues me as a characteristic of George Eastman and the Eastman Kodak Company that he founded. Is at the end of the war, all of the plants that were in Oak Ridge, there were a number of them, took a vote about whether or not the employees would join a union. None of them were unionized during the war, but right after the war, all of the plants took a vote as to whether or not they would join the union. All of the plants except the one run by Tennessee Eastman voted to join the union, and that plant, the people voted not to join the union. Now, that 200 or 300 management people from Kodak, with their management policy and the way they handle people and the operation, influenced those people that they didn't need or want a union. That tells you something about that company.
Well, I think the people all had a sense that they were participating in an important role in the objectives. And that feeling of participation meant that their voice was already being heard.
But that feeling apparently did not develop in the employees of other organizations down there.
That's right. So it really is a very, very important point.
It's an important point as far as industrial management is concerned. Yes.
Fine.
Okay, well, I think that brings us here.